in a new Libya. Celebrations have continued through the night following the death of Colonel Gaddafi. Around the world, the news of Gaddafi's demise has been welcomed. President Obama also pointed to the challenges ahead for the Libyan people.
This is a momentous day in the history of Libya. The dark shadow of tyranny has been lifted, and with this enormous promise, the Libyan people now have a great responsibility.
And could this be the end of the fight for a Basque homeland? ETA declares a definitive end to its armed campaign against the Spanish government. Hello, welcome to BBC World News. I'm Martine.
And I'm Tanya Beckett. Coming up later in World Business Report, a summit this weekend to save the euro. But already France and Germany admit they'll have to come back to the table next week for yet more talks. Plus, Rupert Murdoch faces his shareholders. He's bracing for a rough ride over News Corporation's phone hacking scandal.
Colonel Gaddafi's death yesterday in his hometown of Sirte now means the Transitional Council can declare the revolution complete. It's in the process of moving its operations to the capital Tripoli, and the rebuilding of the battle-scarred country can begin. Our World Affairs correspondent Gabriel Gatehouse reports now on the end of the Libyan dictator who ruled with an iron fist for more than 40 years. You may find some of the images in his report disturbing. Well, President Obama said the news marked a fresh chapter for the people of Libya. At the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon highlighted the challenges lying ahead for Libyans emerging from this bloody revolution. Wendy Urquhart has more. So it's the end of another chapter in the so-called Arab Spring, and of course the start of another. Let's go now to where this political upheaval in North Africa and the Arab world actually began. Tunisia, where you'll remember peaceful protests started last December, and by mid-January the country's long-time autocratic leader had fled to Saudi Arabia. Let's talk to Pascal Harter, our correspondent who's in the Tunisian capital. Pascal Harter, in I suppose what you could call the cradle of the Arab Spring in Tunis. Let's go to Cairo now, of course the capital of Egypt, which was the next to go in this movement of political upheaval that swept along North Africa. Let's go to Cairo. Our correspondent there is John Lyne. Cairo, John, presumably the generals will be watching pretty closely too.
Yes, I think perhaps
much for that. John Lyne, our correspondent, reporting live there from the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Now, President Obama said the death of Colonel Gaddafi marked the end of a long and painful chapter for the people of Libya. He said 4 decades of what he called the iron fist of the Gaddafi regime had now come to an end, and Libyans now had a great responsibility to build a democratic country. Let's go live to Washington and speak to the BBC's correspondent there, Adam Brooks. Does this amount then to a foreign policy success for President Obama? Adam Brooks in Washington, thank you for that. And a little bit later on we'll be talking a bit more in detail about what to expect in Libya now in the days and weeks ahead. Meanwhile, let's have a look at some other news now. And after months of toing and froing, Europe's leaders are now trying to finalise what they call a grand plan to try to save the Eurozone this weekend. But last night it was announced that that was unlikely, and a second meeting is going to have to be held on Wednesday. Now, France and Germany have admitted that they are still deeply divided over how they are going to stabilise this crisis. Our Brussels correspondent, Matthew Price, reports. Well, it seems as though that former solidarity between Angela and Nicolas is falling apart, and of course the backdrop to this is the seemingly never-ending Greek drama.
Yes, I mean, there are many elements to this. One of them is how do you stabilise the Greek problem when the Greek problem keeps getting worse? So every time you catch up with it, it seems to have deepened. That's one of the problems. The other problem is what do you do about the potential collateral damage elsewhere? Italian debt would be the obvious place to look for that. And the other problem is the French banks, which are holding rather a lot of Italian debt, which is not looking particularly close to its face value at this point, meaning to say that it's devalued, and of course Greek debt as well. The German banks are not quite so exposed, but the debate is to whether France should be holding up its own banks or whether that would be a Eurozone problem.
Also, Murdoch is under a certain amount of pressure today.
Yeah, AGM in Los Angeles, and he holds 40% of the shares. But there is, of course, enormous shareholder dissent at the continuing grip the Murdoch family have on News Corporation. But as I say, a lot of shareholders will be looking to vote against him staying, and his son for that matter, but he holds 40% of the shares.
All right, thank you very much for now. So that's a tantalising glimpse of what's coming up later in World Business Report in about 20 minutes or so. Thanks, Tanya. You're with BBC World News, still to come. A new beginning for Spain as Basque separatist group ETA announced the end to its 40-year-long violent campaign. These are our top stories here at BBC World News this morning. After 42 years of ruling Libya, the final moments of Colonel Gaddafi, caught and killed in Sirte, the city where he was born. In Spain, the Basque separatist organisation ETA has announced what it calls a definitive end to all armed activity. So, as we were just saying, in Spain, 40 years of violent campaigning by the Basque separatist group ETA seem to have come to an end. The leaders of the organisation announced what they're calling a definitive end to all armed activity and say they'll take an historic opportunity to reach a just and democratic settlement in the Basque country. Now, the statement was released late last night on Thursday, and it sees the end of a long conflict in which over 800 people have died. Live now to Madrid and the BBC's Sarah Rainsford. I suppose the big question really is, with ETA, does a definitive end mean a definitive end? They've had ceasefires before which have been broken. Now let's go back to those momentous events in Libya yesterday. Of course, the demise of Colonel Gaddafi. Here in the studio is Faraj Najem, a London-based Libyan academic. Good morning and thank you for coming in. How big a problem do you think is the rather unclear and the uncertainty surrounding the final moments of Colonel Gaddafi? There's some suggestion that he might have been executed.
Free for all Libyans.
Faraj Najem, thank you very much indeed for giving us your thoughts on those momentous events that have taken place in Libya in the last 24 hours. You're with BBC World News.